Hello again, and welcome to Void Signal. It is your host, Brian Prime, and I wanted to give you an introduction to this week's episode because introductions are a thing that I'm going to be doing from here on out. I should be telling you who I'm speaking with and why. It's a thing I probably should have done sooner, but I didn't necessarily have the courage for, but times are changing. So my guest this week is Colin. He's been releasing music in the dark electronic, industrial adjacent kind of a scene for a little over 10 years. And he's had his work featured in popular film and TV like True Blood and Bones. As for the why, we're talking to Colin. He's a person who's driven, who's motivated, and has accomplished some things for himself that he wanted. And he has thoughts and opinions that he's not afraid to share. And we talk a little bit about his experiences in the modern music landscape. So, yeah, here's the conversation with Colin. We'd actually spoken 2 weeks prior, but that recording didn't turn out quite as I'd hoped. So we met again to do one more. So if we seem a little familiar, that's why. One last order of business, friends, and then our time is at an end for now. It would mean so much to me if you considered visiting voidsignal.net or patreon.com/voidsignal. And for as little as $2 per month, you can sign up to support the creation of more ad-free Void Signal. Every little dollar helps. So thank you so much for your consideration. And if you would like to sponsor an episode of Void Signal, please reach out to me at brian@voidsignal.net. As always, please stay safe, stay loud, and take the utmost of care. How's it going? How's your interview? And I'm like, there's nobody in here yet. Thanks for rescheduling, making this work. Much appreciated. So the reason that I wanted to re-record, and I told AJ this as well, we, before the interview, like she and I both had like smoked a bowl together, and she kind of interrupted you a lot. So I wanted I wanted to like re-record it where, you know, I'm actually getting all of your answers. So, so thank you.
Yeah, it's fine. I mean, honestly, I didn't feel like I was interrupted.
Okay.
It felt like a nice group three-way.
Yeah. Yeah, it was fun, and I like it. I liked it a lot, but I was like, well, I want to, you know, I want the audience to get all your answers and everything. So,
Right.
But we can go ahead and start if you're ready, or unless you need a sec.
Oh, no, I'm ready. I was just going to throw out there, are you still thinking about doing like a group thing again?
I not for this one, but I do want to do more round table episodes.
Right.
But it would be, I definitely want to have you back on with like, I was thinking about having you on with an artist from Ontario named Phil Gonzo. He does makes like EDM kind of stuff, but kind of like not really in our I don't want to say our scene, but you know the goth industrially dark kind of electronic-y kind of a scene. He's a little outside of it, but I don't know, just based on like personality. I know, wow. But based on like personalities and the way like people think, I was like, that could generate some cool discussion. But
I'm game.
Cool.
That's all I really wanted to say. Like, is that I'm game to, you know, revisit what the roundtable kind of experience was.
Cool. Yeah, for sure.
You know, but let's do this.
Okay. Excellent. Well, I'll go ahead and we're rolling. I'll go ahead and just fire off an intro really quick, and we'll start. But welcome to Void Signal. I'm your host, Brian Prime. I'm joined this week by Colin from Slider. And thank you so much for making this work again. I will go ahead and put a question to you, but we had a discussion a few weeks back, and we kind of talked about your music a little bit, but I was revisiting it today and yesterday in the run-up to this and listening to actually your album from 2014. I wanted to kind of go back and sort of see how that sounded 10 years on. Really enjoyed my time with it. I think it's a great record still. I stumbled on a song I hadn't really taken a lot of notice to before. The song "Caught Up." It's track 3 on the record, "Science of Noise." But anyway, aside from that, just listening to the record 10 years on, it's interesting to see your sort of progression. But I guess I'll ask you about that. Is that when it comes to examining yourself and your own sort of progression. How do you feel about where you are now?
Oh, well, fuck. Coming out with
Yeah,
like
sorry.
heavy hitter right out of the bat. It's firstly crazy to think about that album being 10 years old because, like you're in a specific place and time, create in that creative mode of making music.
Mm-hmm.
And that encapsulation of that time is in that album. And it was allowing me as somebody who kind of was spending more time in the dance floor realm, because that's where I came from originally, was, DJing and raves and making music for that whole just experience that is, getting out and being in the dark, munching on drugs and lasers. And trying to find a space where that could collide with actual songwriting.
Mm-hmm.
And if that makes sense, because not to say that, music played in a club aren't songs, but they're formatted in a specific way to elicit a specific response while you're dancing. Whereas a song verse chorus bridge elicits a different emotional response because, obviously you can dance to it, but there's a tendency to have a little bit more thoughtfulness to it or a little bit more like longevity, like stick with the audience a little bit longer and kind of imprint a soundtrack to someone's life through that songwriting. And that really started to entice me more and more because, electronic music can get very formulated very quickly. And I never really felt like what I'm doing artistically could live that long in such a small box. So Science and Noise came out as this. It's kind of like it's not really my first album because I put out like little albums before that, which were just kind of like, attempts. I don't know. Science and Noise felt like an actual album when that came together. And Caught Up, for example, working with Nika, she's such a great vocalist, and we both kind of aligned from coming out of making dance records. Like she's a vocalist on I don't know if you've ever heard of the Head Candy compilations.
I have not.
Or any of like there's like a whole deep house movement, and you can tell by her soulfulness of her voice like how well that would work with like groovy deep house stuff. And to kind of say, well, could we do something a little bit more drum and bass? Could we make it a little bit more aggressive? And that's definitely one of my favorite pieces on that album.
And I don't mean to interrupt you here, but that is a thing that we did talk about a little bit before that I would want to hear your thoughts on again was, and it's a thing that I saw you kind of express a little bit of an opinion on like Twitter or something like last year, was the difference between writing tracks versus writing songs. And it stuck with me a lot just because it was like just enough of a perspective shift on the way we think about something that especially music, a thing that I consume every day, right? Like, but to suddenly stop and before I listen to a song or while I am listening to it, take that moment to say like, is this a song or is this a track? And I like your distinction of like, a song is a thing that like maybe has a little bit more of a I don't want to say purpose, but I feel like it's reaching a little bit further than a track is, maybe. Is that how you feel? Would you agree with that, or?
Yeah, the thing with what I said on Twitter was it was kind of a social experiment to just see, because you spend enough time on social media and you just feel like everything is designed to antagonize you. So I literally tried to poke the bear on Twitter. I wanted to get a response out of people because I knew there were people who were going to be like offended by my, degrading tracks, quote unquote, to something, less than a song.
Sure.
Where it wasn't really meant to be that. It was meant to kind of just be a catalyst to have a conversation of, should you really be so wrapped up in the genre of what you're doing that it has to be a track and it has to be fit into this box, and then it just becomes disposable? Because, that's how it was when you're a DJ. I'm so far out of it now. I don't assume it's that much different, but like you play tracks out at a club night and then you don't play them again. There's this kind of trickle effect of like more music coming out, getting the latest thing to the dance floor, et cetera. And, there would be classics that would emerge from that and have that timeless feel to them. But tracks in general just seem to just kind of be there, do their job, and, leave you the minute that they're over. And to me, again, that's something I did for so long that the meaning of that to me starts to get diluted of like, well, yeah, it's fun. It's so fun to make people dance, but can you make people dance and also make them go like, oh, I really enjoy listening to that. I'm going to put that on my headphones.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm going to add that to this Spotify playlist for, you know, driving around or, you know,
Mm-hmm.
whatever it is that you do in your life. I feel like that makes music stick around a little bit longer.
Yeah.
And that entices me as a creator because, you know, we want to feel like we're doing something that resonates with people. Otherwise, you feel so insular, and while, you know, doing stuff for yourself is it, you know, that's a creative feeling to have. That's great, but at the same time, you want to make a little mark somehow.
Yeah.
And that's how I kind of felt, you know, every time I approached an album coming into Science and Noise and moving on from there, is like I want these to be little kind of like milestone moments for me to look back and recognize that's where I was at this particular point in time, and to give, you know, anyone who listens to my work, you know, another marker point of like this is a like I don't know how to say it, like it's that, you know, like you could say like I could have a blue period as a painter.
Sure.
You know, it's like this is this period. And I looked at like the following records, Erode and Automata and Void, as a kind of like a trilogy of thought process that kind of like stand on their own. But to me, they're all three kind of tell like a 3-part little story.
Gotcha. And I do quite like the sort of this is gonna switch gears a little bit here, but I do quite like the atmospheric sort of you know, the every album that I've listened to of yours, there's going to be the tracks that are the songs that sort of seem, you know, let's get dancing, let's get moving, or maybe they have something to say, but then there's also the sort of slower pace kind of atmospheric tracks that are just sort of the you know, as somebody who, like you said, I'm like, you know, I'm not just enjoying this in a dance floor sort of a mindset or context, but I'm, you know, I'm cleaning my house or I'm cleaning my kitchen or whatever.
Right.
So I'm, you know, to have that sort of come on in the background and be like, have a moment of like, I'm appreciating a thing that is maybe this is like the right setting for it, I guess. It's just sort of a like, while I am going about my day, and maybe there's a component to it that kind of reaches out to me and like catches my attention a little bit more than usual, which has happened. But I think that's such a cool sort of goal to aspire to, of like, this is sort of where I'm at this time. I will put this question to you. It's been you put out this Feudal Engine last year, 2023. And you've also, real quick before I go on with asking about like the feature on another album and everything, you know, it is worth commenting on the fact that like there are a lot of remixes on here. You've got a ton with a bunch of people, and I think that's cool. I think it's cool to like, you know, hear different interpretations and rearrangements for things, and have artists bring their own skill set to bear on a thing that's already made. I think it can turn out fantastic. But do you feel that having so many remixes has been a plus, or do you ever feel like it has worked against you?
You know, there's a delicate balance for sure. I love remix culture. It's another part of, you know, being involved in early electronic music stuff in the 90s, and like getting bootleg remixes where, you know, you're flipping like one of my favorites is In a Big Country. I have a white label vinyl record. I have no idea who did the remix of it, but they turned that old 80s track into this big room dance track. And that to me was so cool, you know, to have those flips like that. So I've always enjoyed remix culture and adding remixers to projects, but at the same time, you don't want to overload people. I've seen, you know, people release remix compilations and have 36 remixes on it.
Yeah.
And I feel like to a point, it's hard to say no to people. Like if you're a creator and you have people that also like what you do and they're offering to remix, and you know, you don't want to step on their toes and be like, I can't, I've got too many. So I think that ends up having the negative effect on a very bloated, you know, compilation that someone's got to slog through.
Right.
So I think the best way to do it is kind of like, and this is from trial and error, because I did release a remix album to kind of celebrate like 10 years of Slider. and have different people remixes throughout all my catalog. But again, that it got kind of bloated, and it gets kind of hard to get people to dial into a specific remix. And releasing them on their own was the pathway I went for the new album. So put the album out and then just kind of trickle out like every month, just like here's another remix. It helps people, in this day and age where there's so much music coming out every day, to remind them, hey, I put this album out. Here's a new remix.
Yeah.
So it's all very strategic to me now. And because I've done it for so long that I know that if I do it like this and I give people that month, every month, a little prod, like, hey, we're putting out music over here. It tends to help the longevity of it, instead of like lumping them all together and just being like, all right, here you go, here's a remix compilation.
Yeah.
Because that's one of the things that Steven at Brutal Resonance, we talked about, was like, could we do a remix compilation for the Futile Engine? And he was like, it's just, I don't think it's going to work. And I kind of agreed at that point. It's like, I'll just trickle them out as we get them.
And I also am a big fan of like the kind of remix culture. I mean, like, I wasn't nearly as involved in it as you are, but I still have those fond memories of like, late 90s, early 2000s of like, you download or somebody sends you or you hear a remix and you're like, oh my God, this is so cool. Who did this? It's such a reimagination of a thing I was familiar with. And
right, totally. And there's some great ones too, like Gravity Kills Manipulated. If you ever talk to Jeff from Gravity Kills, he'll tell you this story about how expensive that whole process was. But you get like a Juno Reactor remix on there, you got a Martin Atkins remix, and then my favorite remixers, I think, if you held the gun to my head and said like who's the best remixing, I would say Rabbit in the Moon, hands down. It would be Rabbit in the Moon tied with Kruder and Dorfmeister, but for two totally different reasons. Like Rabbit in the Moon had like the greatest approach to taking any like pop song, like they did Garbage Milk, which is like this slow kind of ballad, and they flipped it into this acid house workout that was just so cool. I kind of almost, if you listen to my remixes and the Rabbit in the Moon remix of Milk, you'll hear how I kind of like pull off of that remix a lot for inspiration on like arrangement, or just like getting something totally different into this realm. Like I just did for Vaseline, the Dutch band. I did a remix for them where they do gothic rock, so it's very somber and there's like acoustic guitar and strings in it. And I was like, oh, fuck all that. We're gonna go and change the tempo, bring in an acid 303 line. Really kind of work in those instrumentations that they originally had in ways that aren't normal. That's when I always do a remix. A lot of people are like, oh, you just take the vocal and put it on a new song. And to me, that's not remixing. That's okay, cool. You wrote a song and you knocked the vocal on top. I try as hard as possible when I'm presented with all the parts of a song in the remixing stage to take a little bit of everything. It might not be noticeable as its original form, but everything is there. It's just messed up and twisted, and sometimes I'll reverse things. Sometimes I'll throw it through a granular processing, which will stretch it out and make it into a smear. But to me, that's what's fun about remixing. It's really totally, and this is when I send remixes back to bands, I always tell them, thank you for letting me fuck up your song, because that's literally what I've done.
Yeah, I like that too, because it's like especially, I think that's so important too, of like the original elements of it need to be there. Like it needs to, I need to know this is a remix.
It's got to live in that same house, Yeah. It's not going to be down the block in the new subdivision that they're building. It's got to be there, right there.
Yeah. I am such a fan though of like remixes that like go the extra mile to completely change the genre of a song. For sure. In particular, there's like a remix of Kite done by the band Glow. That's just like a total reimagining. Similarly, the metal band Zeal and Ardor has a remix by like I don't remember the name, but it's like it takes a metal song and it turns it into this like fantastic, like high tempo sort of a dance track that's got all this anger and aggression to. Oh, it's fantastic. But the repurposing, I think, is such a fine art that maybe not a lot of people are necessarily very well practiced at. I'll put this question to you though. Do you feel that remixes and remix culture do you think it has improved? Do you like the state that it's in sort of at this point versus maybe when you started, or is it the same?
That's a good question. I don't know how much. I think like on a technology standpoint, like
Mm-hmm.
things are so much easier. You know, even I talk about bootleg remixes, right? So
Mm-hmm.
rewind 20 years in the 2000s when I had that grabbed that white label in a big country. You know, they
Mm-hmm.
didn't have a way to extract the voice, the acapella out of the music.
Mm-hmm.
Like you had to be strategically cutting around the two track or like the actual final song. You didn't get the
Mm-hmm.
parts to it. Now there's stem splitting.
Mm-hmm.
And I use Logic. That's my DAW or digital audio workstation where I record in. And they've just released a new version that they have an AI generator in there that will take any song or any audio you put in it and strip it out to vocals, drums, bass, guitars, give you the stems. So like the door is wide open now for bootleg remixes. I wish I had that rewind 20 years ago because I was
Mm-hmm.
literally I did a bootleg remix of Left Field where I took the audio off the actual CD, took it into like what was it, SoundForge I think, and cut it up, you
Mm-hmm.
know, to do that to make the bootleg remix and to have the technology now. Back then I think would have been I would have done so many more bootleg remixes
Yeah.
to the point now where I'm thinking like, oh, should I do a few? Would it be fun to, you know? So that element, I think it's definitely improved and it's giving people more chances to be creative uh,
Mm-hmm.
without the bogged down of the limitation. But
Mm-hmm.
maybe sometimes the limitation is good for the creativity. So I don't know if one direction is better than the other. I think the
Mm-hmm.
quality of remixes in general, sound wise, is just exponentially better because
Mm-hmm.
everybody has access to like high end stuff in their computer now. You don't
Mm-hmm.
need hardware. You think about early electronic music and how even like the Prodigy, that's was Liam sitting in his bedroom with a whole bunch of gear and sampling
Mm-hmm.
into hardware, and not a computer in sight, just living life.
Yeah, I remember seeing the pictures from back then of like, oh, here's Prodigy's live setup, and it's a tower of gear.
Right? You
Like,
couldn't even see him. You
no,
could not see Liam. That's why he put that's why Keith and everyone they were dancing to give you something to look at.
yeah, yeah, just like a tower of just gear that's being used, and the sound quality like certainly benefited from it. I mean, because at the time that the Prodigy came out, there was nothing that sounded like that. It was so loud and so crisp and so interesting compared to a lot of other things at the time. It is sort of a huge factor to me, though, when it comes to, as somebody who is, I just got my first DJ controller.
Nice.
It's a thing I've had an interest in for a long time. But now that I'm sitting down to sort of think about, oh, I want to play music live for people. And I start listening to stuff and comparing, like, oh, I've loved this track for 20 years, but this track doesn't really sound all that great, or it doesn't have great production, or something like that versus something newer. Is that substantial increase in quality that we can see in everybody, like we were just talking about, of like, somebody's regular ass desktop computer is now going to produce a song that sounds masterful, right? Like amazing. It's so much louder and crisp and blah blah blah. Do you think that is does that sort of at least, what are your thoughts on like the sort of modern raising of the bar versus like some older tracks? Because at least for me, like I will listen to older songs and I'm like, oh, I loved this song, but it sounds very tinny, or it's very sort of it sounds antiquated. It's like it was some
Right.
industrial
It's of its
musician.
time.
Yeah, it was
Yeah,
somebody making the most of what they had.
for
But
sure. That's the problem. I think within, and is it a problem? I guess
mm,
we industrial is such a DIY scene.
mm-hmm,
There's no access to high end studios. That there's a lot of that. Got to get done what I can with what I have,
mm-hmm,
and there's a lot to that I think kind of creates an artist's just persona and what they
mm-hmm,
put out. You can like look at like Youth Code, for example.
mm-hmm,
There's a band that's really lo-fi in the terms of the gear being used, but the abrasiveness of the music, uh, you don't mind it.
Mm-hmm.
If they were doing, an album like Delirium,
Right.
or Conjure
Yeah.
One, then for sure you'd be like, oh, okay, well, I'm losing something here because
Mm-hmm.
the details and the dynamics aren't as polished. So I really do think it's a matter of like if you're setting out to DJ and you have this wide breadth of stuff you like, is to try to find how things can fit together in that same era
Mm-hmm.
so that you don't run into those kinds of issues. Because yeah, even just look at like Skinny Puppy's catalog,
Yeah.
right? If you played something from Last Rites and then you played something off Weapon, their last album, there's going to be a radical change in
Mm-hmm.
production quality just alone by the people who worked on that,
Right.
because that's how they've evolved. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's, to me, is talking about barometers and moments and times, it really kind of shows you how that progression happens for creativity.
Mm-hmm.
But I think if you give everybody the tools to do something, and that sort of barriers removed, and now everybody has access, I don't think that necessarily is that like term like all boats rise.
Right.
Because
Right.
unfortunately, like I've said this, and this is kind of another controversial take, is that I think industrial music as a culture attracts a lot of people who don't have talent because they think it's easy.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I can just scream. I don't have to sing. Oh, I don't have to learn how to play a guitar. I just have to plug it through as much distortion that no one can tell I can't play a guitar. You
Mm-hmm.
know what I mean?
Yes, I do, and
So
I agree with you completely. Go on.
there's so much of that
Mm-hmm.
just kind of seeps through, because again, you can get a laptop, you can get some headphones, you can get cracked plugins, crack your DAW, go to town. You don't need any money, and your next thing you know, you're putting music out,
Mm-hmm.
and that's for better or worse for a culture. I think
Mm-hmm.
if industrial or any genre that has a small following doesn't police itself in some sort of quality, you're going to end up with too much crap in it. And I think that really
Mm-hmm.
kind of just turns certain people off from the outside who look in and go, oh, okay, well, I thought this genre was, better than this.
Yes, and I
And I'll
do.
probably get shit on for that take. And I don't care. I really wish people would stop creating such a circle jerk around, oh, they're so great and you're so great. Maybe tell them, your snare sucks. Work on it.
Yeah, yeah. No,
Maybe you think about tuning the guitar a little bit, or
mm-hmm.
maybe some training, some practice, because you want to just jump in right at I wrote my first song, let's everyone hear it. I'm not, no, write 100 songs and then maybe I'll listen to your 101st song.
Yes.
That's how I feel as a creative person, being around the block a bit.
Yes. I agree. I do agree with you. I think that it's that DIY aspect, and it makes people. It gives the people this sort of idea that like, well, if they can do it, I can do it. And I think the crowning difference in a lot of those cases is that, like, using a big example, Front 242, like none of them started out trying to make music as musicians. They wanted to do it because they were not musicians, but they still took the time to, like, okay, these are the components we have. How do we make them sound good? How do we make them sound like music? How do we, put in the extra effort and everything? And while I'm a huge fan of innovation and like, oh, I made do with what I had, but I still made this cool thing, like, great. Like, I feel like that comes with like a knowledge of what you're working with, coupled with like a desire to want to do better. And I will say this, and maybe this is, I don't know if this is controversial or not. I don't give a shit. But I think that so many people in the industrial scene and the adjacent scenes, goth, whatever, dark, whatever, I think there are a lot of people who are not very open to feedback. So I think even if someone were to sit them down and maybe not say your snare sucks, but like, but say like, hey, I like what you're doing, but you could do this better or that better or whatever, constructive feedback. I feel like a lot of people are not going to be open to hearing that. They want to do what they want to do, and this is a scene that sort of nurtures that, like, well, I'm pursuing my own path and doing my own thing. Okay, great, that's awesome. I'm glad for you, but hey, also, I'm not going to play it at the club because it's not very good or it's whatever. Like, it's I feel like the personalities that it brings is also a component of that. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I mean, that goes for any kind of art. You could be an
Sure.
impressionist painter. You could, there are people who it's really just to me a matter of, are you really an artist or are you in this for other reasons?
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean? Because
Yes.
like an artist themselves, and speaking from my own experience, like I don't like what I end up making at the end of the day. Like I always feel like it could be better.
Mm-hmm.
So to have the availability to know that I can be vulnerable to someone else and say like, check this out. What do you think? And
Mm-hmm.
if I trust that person, and there's only a few people I would even turn around and say, hey, what do you think? I need some help.
Mm-hmm.
That's a vulnerability that a lot of people who work solely on ego, they can't have that vulnerability, because the minute that they say to themselves, this could be better, or I'm not as good, blah, 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 they've kind of diminished their own egotism.
Mm-hmm.
And that would just kind of like deflate them psychologically. Do you
Sure.
know what I mean? Because
Mm-hmm.
they built up this persona and they've had a lot of people tell them, yes, oh, you're so good. A lot, especially if they're of the attractive variety, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because then they get pined after, and they get lusted after. And if enough fans tell them, oh, you're so great because you look the part, you misstep and you start, pulling punches in the music, those people are never going to tell you that, you didn't hit it that time. They're
Yeah.
going to be like still into it, and that perpetuates that. And it's kind of a sad place to be as a creative person if you're kind of reliant on a fan base to give you that feeling.
Mm-hmm.
So I try personally. I'm I don't have that many fans, and it's probably for the betterment of my art.
What sort of on that note, and I do agree with you there as well. I think there's a lot of I have a look, or I have a gimmick and a theme and a brand, and I'm coasting on that, and the music is whatever. It's good enough. It's what fans expect. They're expecting the middle of the road, and that's what is being delivered. Because the person in question may be relying on all these other sort of apparatus to make up for their, who gives a shit if my song sounds like garbage and its full 3-minute, 30-second runtime. It sounds great in this YouTube TikTok clip or this Instagram reel where I'm wearing this thing and I look so cool. I feel like that's definitely a thing that happens. And
Right, they're putting the cart before the horse, and
mm-hmm.
and there's a lot of that is just kind of like what musicians and artists are being bought and sold right now, is that like you have to be a content creator.
Mm-hmm.
Your art itself is not as important. It's
Mm-hmm.
better to be a curated face and accessible on such a personal level,
Mm-hmm.
because that's the social media. I don't really give a fuck what my favorite musician ate for breakfast.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the times, once you crack into that nut, you might start seeing them say shit that you don't want to hear them
Yeah.
say. Like
Yeah.
if you're a Morrissey fan,
Oof.
I heard, and then during the whole COVID-19, I used to like Ian Brown from the Stone Roses, but that dude went off the fucking rails. And I'm like, great, I'm glad I know that. So every time I listen to one of your songs, in the back of my head, I got this guy's tweets rolling around.
Mm-hmm.
Or like,
Yeah.
don't meet your idols thing is like so personified into like their social media presence that, it gets a little, I don't know. I think they get so caught up in that and they forget, like, why are you here? Like stop and
Mm-hmm.
have an existential moment of like, why are you here to make art, or are you here to be famous? Do you
Yeah.
need accolades, or do you need to self-express? And I'm
Mm-hmm.
always going to sit in the camp of self-expression. And if the result is, polished and amazing and great, is probably going to resonate with me more, just because of where I come from. I work in audio technology. I want to hear awesome things. So I listen to a new band's album, and if it's fucking perfect songwriting, perfect production, then it's like, this is great.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, if it's like there's a whole lot of passion and it's got lo-fi production, but it hits me, that's all that fucking matters. And
Right.
People need to remember that. Like if you're going into this crazy thing called music, like have some personality and have some willingness to be vulnerable,
Mm-hmm.
because it's not like all bravado that you see on stage, and everyone expects I think that's some of the funniest things. Like if people start talking to me after seeing like my, like what little persona I have online. It's like, oh, I didn't expect you to be so funny. And like, you just think we sit around and brood like all the time.
Yes, exactly.
We're in the dark, we turn the lights off, and we just brood and wait for you to listen to our songs and
Yeah.
industrial music.
Isn't that what
No,
you're, is that not what
we're
you're
human
doing?
beings. We laugh, we
Yeah.
cry.
Hmm. Have deep flaws. It's fine. Whatever. Whatever. Yeah, no, I agree with you. Um, I do think that sort of the personal aspect of it too is that like that it can be such a blessing and such a curse because on the one hand you can meet lovely people and you can find out like, hey, this person whose music maybe I'm not really into it, but they're so cool, they're so rad, like I will go out and see them live every chance I get because they put on a great show, or they're so sweet, or they're so nice or charismatic or whatever. That also comes with the added benefit of like finding out somebody is garbage, or like you said, like during a lockdown, like, hey, somebody's running their mouth saying some like out of pocket shit that you're like, oh man, I really loved your music and I thought you were so cool, but now you're some sort of idiot, and I'm I'm disappointed.
Right. There's a lot of disappointment going on there. And I think that
Mm-hmm,
again goes back to like the scene propping up people who are really fucking nice but make really bad music.
mm-hmm,
And then if that person happens to fall out of favor, and then like there you go, man. Like that's like maybe the music wasn't good all along. Maybe
yeah.
people were just being nice to you. And again, that's the scene. And I get it. I really don't want people to think that like I am totally anti scene, but I just feel like there are a lot of negative connotations to scenes and how
Mm-hmm,
they're structured. And
mm-hmm,
because I never was part of one, I think that's my problem. I grew up in bumfuck nowhere.
mm-hmm,
My exposure to electronic music was not originally through raves. And my exposure to industrial music was not from industrial clubs. It was literally stumbling through record stores and finding music and pushing the two together. Like, why can't I listen to, KMFDM and then also listen to BT?
mm-hmm.
Like I had no idea that we have to sit in a scene and we have to follow the rules.
Mm-hmm. I can
So
relate to that a lot because I also didn't have like a scene or a culture or anything. I grew up sort of in isolation as well, sort of having songs sent to me on the internet and being like, hey, Wumpscut's cool. I'll listen to this. And then I'm also going to listen to, you mentioned BT. That's a great pick. But like also like, hey, instead of
it's like the furthest from KMFDM I could think of.
yeah. But, for me, it was like, I'm going to listen to Wumpscut and then I'm going to listen to Infected Mushroom or, something like
Yeah.
that, or
You could
Hallucinogen.
probably draw a line though between Wumpscut and infected mushroom or hallucinogen or even
Mm-hmm.
sphongle. But yeah, I totally get what you mean, and I wish there was more of that. And that's what I honestly thought. Like the naive me, rewind to 1999 when I was putting my first music on MP3.com, and I was like, this is the greatest place because there are no, they kind of sold it as like there's no just one, you know, culture. It's every
Mm-hmm.
culture. It's all these people coming together. It's the melting
Mm-hmm.
pot. It's the internet. And like, why should that not influence our art
Mm-hmm.
if we're coming up in that and what we're interested in?
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I want to be as far as
Yeah.
an artist is concerned. I don't. You want to call me industrial, fine. You want to call me EDM, fine. Uh, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. And
I just want to. I want to have something that there's a thread, right? My goal is there's a thread. If you hear a Slider song, you know it's a Slider song. That's all I want.
Yeah. And I do agree with you in that respect too, of like, even now as I'm like fancying myself trying to become a DJ, I've been to plenty of goth clubs now. They play a lot of goth music, and
Yeah,
I find myself like,
headhunter a lot.
yeah. And I find myself sort of like flipping through songs of like, well, what would I want to play? And I'm like, well, I want to play all the shit that is not industrial music. I want to play all the stuff that people in the scene don't play, or maybe they don't know about it, or maybe they do and they don't give a shit or whatever. But like I feel you're sort of it speaks to me when you talk about that sort of like, well, why can't we have both these things? Like, let's play The Prodigy and Infected Mushroom and a Suicide Commando track and a Gravity Kills song, or a Circuit Preacher or something cool, and like, why do we have to bother with like conventions or sticking with this one thing. Like, let's make some goths uncomfortable and play some dance music, maybe. Like, we're, I can't dance to goth music, so either. So, let's play some upbeat shit. Like, I don't know. But I do agree with you on that point. I will. We're already at 38 minutes, and I want to put another. I will. I'll actually go ahead and put the last question of the show to you, because you give good answers. You give a lot of meat and potatoes to dissect.
I talk a lot.
Yeah, that's a nice way of saying that. Yeah. But what is something that you well, now that we've both been shitting about the scene, what's something that you have been enjoying recently? And your answer can be anything: a book, a movie, TV show, or just what's something that you're jazzed about when you wake up.
Well, I mean, the new Trent Muller record is excellent.
Mm-hmm.
I
I have
really
not
love.
heard it myself, but I know the name.
Yeah, he has a really cool talk about, milestone albums, like from where he
Mm-hmm.
started with kind of like IDM electronic sounds that didn't really have vocals in them, to slowly starting to pull in guitars and different vocalists, and then kind of just this morphing that whole vibe into like a post-punk band
Mm-hmm.
format. That's really, I think it's a very cool evolution as an artist to
Mm-hmm.
go through, but you can see how people have dropped off at different stages. Like, I can't deal with it because he brought guitars in,
Mm-hmm.
or I can't deal with it because it's got this like slow dive influence now, or the album that's got like a surf rock vibe. And I love that. I think that's great. So I would,
Yeah.
the new Trent Muller record,
Yeah.
highly listenable, just good this time of year, where depending on what hemisphere you're in, for us, the leaves falling, and it's
Yeah.
been rainy and misty here, and it's been like the perfect soundtrack for that.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been really quite enjoying that. And then um, the new record from Dive, Frog and Broiling Water.
Mm-hmm.
Again, this is totally not scene like industrial scene stuff, but
Sure.
they're kind of like the slow core slash shoegaze kind of realm,
Mm-hmm.
and just a masterfully written album. And the quality of the recording, again, for me as an engineer, is just like they really nailed it. So it's like such a beautiful experience to listen to.
Yeah.
Nothing's like out of place, and it's the right amount of loudness.
Yes.
As an engineer, so a lot of people like to crank stuff up now, and it's just like, you don't have to do it that loud.
Yeah. Real quick on that note, a thing that your answer reminded me of. I'm definitely going to check out this Trent Muller record, because I know the name, and it's I associate it with like high quality electronic sort of production. But the mentioning of like guitars and people falling away and having stuff against things, it just reminded me of sort of adjacent to what we were just talking about. I was at Mechanismus 2022, and this band had just finished playing that was a more traditional sort of industrial rock kind of a thing, like some dudes with some keyboards and guitars, like a little. Things got a little shovey on the floor. It was great. It was a nice change of pace, right? Like, hey,
You get
we're
one
kind of
dude with a drum pad and one drumstick.
yeah, yeah, like it was fun. But the next band comes out and they're like, there aren't going to be any fucking guitars up here. All right, cool. I don't know why you have to be a dick about it, but I think I'll use this opportunity to go smoke. It's you're alienating people right out of the gate, but just because you want to shit on something, let people
It's
enjoy a
so
guitar.
funny to me. It's so funny to me that the hills that musicians will die on.
Yes.
If it's not guitars, there was back in the 90s, there in LA, there was a guy who was selling bumper stickers that said drum machines have no soul. You get them for $1. There was like a whole article written about this guy and how much he hated drum machines, and they have no soul. And these are the hills that, because he was a jazz musician or something like that. So he's like, oh, it's so antithetical to creativity to have a machine playing a rhythmic pattern that doesn't change. It's like, well, I hate to tell you this, but people kind of like repetitive noise.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. But anyway, aside from that, just, sort of man, just love things, appreciate things. I feel like is, but band evolutions are a thing that I sort of really like to see and see how people evolve over time, especially if once they have like some a pretty lengthy back catalog to them. Trent Mahler is a great example. I still really like Uncle a lot, and I listen to Uncle pretty on the regular. Those
All
are,
right, well, I
you
can
know,
talk about Uncle.
you strike me as a dude who's into Uncle. So yeah.
Well, my friend Chris Allen, he mixed the War Stories album.
Hmm. Mm-hmm.
For me, all right. So science fiction came out. I heard that when I was in high school. Just having Shadow involved, I was like, oh, this is cool. I had just discovered what trip hop is, and there's
Mm-hmm.
another example of throwing a whole bunch of people in that are kind of out of that element. Like having Tom York come in,
Mm-hmm.
or again Ian Brown come in and sing on that record. And then to watch them go from that to Never Neverland, where James Lavelle starts pulling in some different people to work
Mm-hmm.
on it, and having Rich File sing on Never Neverland. He had never really sang before. If you
Mm-hmm.
know Rich's work, he used to make like breakbeat tracks for Adam Freeland's label. So like, here's a guy who's solely a producer that
Mm-hmm.
James heard him singing, like, in a cab, I think it was. He's just like, oh no, you can sing, dude. Let's push, like, come, let's start writing these tracks. And
Mm-hmm.
originally he was going to sing on some of the science fiction stuff too, but I could go on and on. But
Yeah.
anyway, my
All
point
right.
is that
Mm-hmm.
here's my point. New Uncle, no, not good. Go
No.
find Toy Drum.
Okay.
Toy
Oh,
Drum,
Toy
okay?
Drum was the Gavin Clark side project.
Yes.
Oh,
Well,
his voice was amazing.
Pablo, Psychonauts, Pablo,
Mm-hmm.
he came on and started to help out in Uncle for War Stories and When to the Nightfall, and like really kind of brought something really interesting to Uncle. And
Mm-hmm.
then he and James kind of left Uncle after Where the Nightfall, and then I don't know. To me, I feel like all the talent left the room. Like
Um.
James is a
Mm-hmm.
great curator, but
Mm-hmm.
the couple things I heard after that, like I was just like he's got one track with some guy who's really trying to do his best Tricky impression. And I was like, man, just call up Tricky. Why don't you
Yeah.
call up Tricky?
Well, yeah. What is he doing? Probably nothing. Like just
Oh no, Tricky's another prophylactic. I can't say that word.
prolific.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Prolific. There we go.
Yeah.
It's been a
Yeah.
long day for me.
Oh.
Check out everything he's been doing too.
Yeah.
He set up a False Idols label. He's been putting out really cool stuff, really minimal stuff, like right to the point kind of stuff that it's a great exercise in minimalism. Like you really don't need a lot to say something.
Mm-hmm.
People get way too involved in the like the big giant productions and having instrumentation on instrumentation on instrumentation to tell a story that you could have done with
Yes.
3 things.
And that,
So,
I feel like that is such a great segue back around to the idea of like sometimes less is so much more, and especially like in an EDM or industrial space, like less can be so much more.
less is not only more, but it's also confidence. It tells
Mm-hmm.
the audience that you're confident in what you're creating because you felt that you didn't need anything else.
Mm-hmm.
I know this from a creative perspective too, because there was a point in, like my early 20s where I would go into a production and I'd be like, okay, it's not good enough. I need another layer. I need another synthesizer. I need another atmospheric bed. I need to do another vocal double. I need to, add to this. And then you get this very bloated wall of sound.
Mm-hmm.
That to me, now looking back, that was just pure, I'm not confident in this idea.
Right.
I should have looked at the idea as a whole and think about how can you get this idea across without needing to stack 12 synthesizers on top of each other.
Right.
So for me now in my older age, looking at bloated projects, or I see some people on social media will like brag like, oh, look, I have 100 tracks in this session. To me, I'm just thinking, is that a good idea?
Yeah. Yeah.
Core of that, can you play that on a guitar or can you play that on a piano and say this is a good song?
Right. And I think you illustrate the point there too of like a at least and this is maybe just my imagination, but I mean I feel like so many people like are afraid of the space between their sounds. You know what I mean? Like it's okay to have some silence or to have like there's the compulsion to fill all the space. And
Yeah.
That can be counterproductive. Real quick before we move on from Uncle, I do agree newer Uncle is not great. I like the remixes that are coming of it. A lot of the remixes of newer Uncle stuff is more interesting than the bass. But if anybody listening, if you decide to check out Uncle, early stuff is great, war stories and science fiction and everything, and Never Neverland. But Where Did the Night Fall is a double album that's just amazing. Gavin Clark and a song with Mark Lanigan and Nick
both guys
Cave.
gone. Yeah, that was a surprise too to have that. And I like the tracks with Leela Moss. I think she's a really good vocalist too.
Yes,
but
agreed.
If you want to go like Uncle adjacent, Rich File has a project called We Fell to Earth, and they put out one record, and it's with Rendue Fowler, who played with Queens of the Stone Age. The two of them got together and made this really kind of cool, just again, it's like post-punk but atmospheric. It's very Uncle adjacent, like very cool stuff, and I wish the two of them would make more records together.
Okay, cool. I will check that out. The other thing that I've been enjoying musically lately is to give a genre answer is and your comments about minimalism sort of reminded me was Circuit Preacher. He's a fresh face on the scene with a sort of a newer project. It's only been around for about a year and a half or something like that, but does a lot with little. And I've been really enjoying my time with his record over the past couple of weeks. It was nice.
I'll probably have to check that out because you're the second person who's mentioned that band. I stay a little far away from, there's a level of influence, and you don't want to be too close to your contemporaries. So a lot of industrial like kind of skirt as far as my own like casual listening. But I'll check it out.
Yeah, for sure. It gets me. It speaks to that younger Brian again. Of like, hey, here's a song that's like kind of minimal, and here's some shouting, and we're mad, and and I'm like, yeah, I am mad. I can't wait till it really dials in on that like teenage.
That's how I feel when I'm like when I listen to Health. I was like, where was this band when I was 18? Because like this his whole lyrics of just like, woe is me, and I'm so sad. I'm just like, and then it's just aggressive music behind it. I was like, fuck.
Yeah, same.
Where was this when I had like, my teenage angst period?
Yeah, I mean that is
I just
really
have middle-aged angst.
Yeah, just that late stage angst is is what I'm in. What a great band as far as like, and that's the thing. I'm a big lyric guy, so like sometimes they don't fucking matter, and that's fine. I don't always give a shit, but for the most part, good lyrics will elevate a song for me, and especially if it's something that's honest and feels. Like you said, you used the word in this show a bunch, vulnerable. I'm a big fan of that.
You talk about, Mark Langan, and you talk about Gavin Clark, two guys that, like their heart is on their sleeve when they're singing. And that to me resonates way more than the, post-production you could have done to pitch correct it, to layer it, to take out all the humanity to it, which is a lot of what, post-production on vocals are these days, and stripping out that vulnerability because they want to be, have that bravado and they want to be seen a certain way. But I don't think that resonates fully beyond just like that's cool, I guess. Like you want to stick to the ribs of people, like show some vulnerability, write a good lyric from your soul, as cheesy as that sounds. And it's one of the things I always struggle with writing lyrics myself is I want to say something, but I want to say it in a way that's not so obtuse. But at the same time, you want to connect. So there's always that line with lyrics. And I think of some bands that like Underworld, Carl Hyde, the way he writes is it's all free form out of his mind into a notebook. And then he just gets together with Rick, and just Rick now. And, they write, he just flows. And you think of how well that works in that space. And Born Slippy, like that's just a song that's really written about his alcoholism. But do you really know that? Not really, because it's kind of a word jumble, but it works. So I think there's space for both.
Mm-hmm.
And it really comes down to how you say it, really, at the end of the day.
Agreed.
And like we said, it's got to be vulnerable. It's got to be real.
Yeah.
And you can't be pulling punches, and you can't be saying, "Oh, look at me," and I'm puffing my chest out, because
Yes.
that gets old real quick.
It does. And I've always been a proponent of, I have a background in creative writing. That's what I went to school for. But I've always been a proponent of, like, regardless of your medium, when you sit down, say something that is true.
Yes.
Whatever words you're going to say, it should be a thing that you hold to be true, and say it and mean it in the words that spring from you the most easily. And I feel like there are, that's such an asset that is lacking in a lot of. I don't want to continue shitting on electronic music, anyway, well, you get the point.
It's something you have to cultivate it. You really do have to cultivate it, because there is the culture at large that wants to show you that everything is this, facade, this bravado. And you start buying into that, regardless of genre, you're going to pull punches.
Agree. Well, I don't want to keep you all day. This has been a blast. I appreciate your time. It's been great to talk to you again. I will actually, I'm just now remembering that earlier in the show, I was going to ask you about what comes next for you. I will. So before we wrap up, I do want to know what is the next chapter for you and for Slider?
I am knee deep in just writing. I've written like 13 just demos over the summer, and I came off of doing the last album saying I'm never gonna do an album again, just because it's like that. Get this out of my fucking face. But maybe I'll do an album. I don't know. I'm taking it more slow, in the sense of just like I do this for me, so I want to have fun again. And to me, having fun is writing a bunch of demos and writing outside of genre and trying to take some genres and smash them together, like drum and bass breaks. I always like those, bringing those into more slower tempo tracks. Like, can you flip a track and have, like a really heavy techno kick drum, but then also flip into a drum and bass breakdown? Like, how does that work? So to me, that's kind of a fun place to be. I'm doing that. And then depending on when you drop this, if it's before November 4th, people can download a free Frontline Assembly remix that I've thrown out for Halloween times off my Bandcamp.
Excellent. This will be out before then.
Oh, cool. Then go grab that. I back in 9 years ago, I did a remix of Next War from the Echoes compilation. There was 2 bonus tracks on Echoes that were written with my friend Ian Pickering from the Sneaker Pimps. And he wrote the hooks for Bill, and to hear Frontline Assembly and Sneaker Pimps kind of like in a blender. So fucking cool. So when Jared reached out back 9 years ago from Frontline, he was like, we need a remix for the Cold Waves comp. Can you help us out? We needed it like a deadline, like now. I'm like, oh yeah, fuck, I'll do it. Sure. I want to do Next War though, because I love that song. If you give me a song I love, I'll kick a remix out. No problem. Yeah. So I did that, and it went on the limited edition compilation. And that was just charity. You can only get it by being at Cold Waves and buying the CD, or I think Jason sold it briefly on the website for Cold Waves. Anyway, I dug it out and said, you know what? More people should hear this. It's been 9 years. Let's remaster it. Let's make it sound better than ever. Turn the volume up. Yeah. And threw it on Bandcamp, free download.
Excellent.
Grab it, enjoy it.
Yeah, I'm gonna go get it right now.
It goes away on November 5th. I'm gonna make it a Bandcamp subscriber exclusive. So you got to give me like $25 a year to hear the back catalog stuffs.
Yeah,
gotcha. I know, $25 and you get. God, I don't even know how many releases we have now.
I know. Imagine when we were kids, like going to the record store and spending $25 to get an entire artist discography.
Yeah, don't get me started on that. I remember the first CD I ever bought was $19.99.
Yeah.
It was a $20 CD. I was like, wow, this is expensive. Tapes are so much cheaper.
Yeah. I remember those days. And I still remember being in like a Warehouse Music and being like, oh, wow, it's $22 or whatever for the new Perfect Circle single or album. And the album's only 30 fucking minutes long or something. Like,
or what's worse was imports.
Yes.
You go into the import section, for me, it was like Newberry Comics here in East Coast. And it'd be like that's the first time I heard the second Sneaker Pimps album was an import because it wasn't released in America, Splinter. And that was like $25 for and I was like, I'm buying this. It's a new Sneaker Prince album. I don't care. I miss that element. I miss buying something without knowing.
Yeah.
I'm looking at the cover and I'm thinking this could be cool. I think that's how I first bought like so many. I think that's the first Frontline CD. I didn't really know who Frontline was. I bought Implode, and I was like, because the Dave McKean artwork on the cover, I was like, what is this guy turning into a bug?
Yeah.
Shit, this has got to be some crazy music. Blow my little 17-year-old mind now, please. And it did.
Yeah, exactly. That was kind of the fun of it. Oh, I loved buying compilations, weird compilations of like, oh, what's Industrial Madness or Industrial Revolution or whatever. And you hear all these bands that are doing weird shit.
Yeah. Or all those Cleopatra compilations.
I was such a sucker for those, man. I bought so many fucking tribute CDs for bands I didn't even listen to. I just was like, yeah, I want to hear Raised in Black do The Cure. I don't know the original song, but this one's cool. Yeah, those were
It's a fun time to have an elastic brain. That's the benefit of youth, is that like when you're not exposed to things, new things come along, you don't have an immediate like gut response to say, ugh. Yeah. Because you don't have that experience yet, right? So when we hear new music, and as we get older, not to go off on a logical, but our brains, we love nostalgia. So like when you hear something and you go, well, that reminds me of this. Well, there's a reason, because your brain's using the same neural pathway. You hear a song you don't like at first because, oh, this is new, I don't get it. Listen to it 2 or 3 times. Let your brain think about it, because what will happen is your brain will go, oh, okay, I remember this a little bit. That's why people all the time will say like, oh, I didn't like that song until I heard it 5 times. It's literally, that's how your brain worked, and that's how your brain was working as a young one, because it was so elastic and you didn't care. You could listen to anything, and that's the benefit of youth. Wish we could have that throughout life.
Yep, we don't have elastic brains anymore. We've just got these stupid, I don't know what I'm saying. We just have stupid brains now. Yeah,
old and crusty ones.
Yeah, we got these rigid brains. So it's
like that rubber band that you find in the back of a drawer that's been there for like 20 years, and it's all like you can't even stretch it out anymore.
Yep, that's our stupid brains now. All right, I will actually wrap this up now. Thank you so much for your time and having a chat.
It's fun.
It's been such a pleasure.
Void Signal intro and outro courtesy of Processor. Visit processor2.bandcamp.com for more Processor, and visit voidsignal.net to help support the creation of more Void Signal. Stay safe, stay loud.